Sorcha, thank you so much for coming and chatting to us here at Stand News.
No worries.
My first question for you is, what brought you to journalism and how did you get started in the field?
So I never studied journalism. I studied, I did a degree in a thing called European Studies in Trinity, which was kind of politics, history and languages. So my real interest was kind of, well, I had a real passion for languages, but honestly my real interest when I was at college age was theatre, and I had big plans in that area that didn't really pan out. But I come from a family of journalists. My parents were both journalists and my grandfather was a journalist, so it was kind of in the blood, and that's why I kind of rallied against that for a while because I wanted to do something different. And actually, after I finished my degree, I had started doing some writing for the university paper Trinity, and then I went travelling for a while and I was working, and I kind of kept a blog, which in 2010 was still, I don't want to say it was novel, but it was, there weren't that many of them around. And through that, I ended up getting into a master's program in London, in the London School of Economics, which was media and development. And I kind of thought I'd go into the third sector. That's where I saw myself going, potentially kind of comms in that area. But while I was studying at LSE, I got on a journalism internship program and then ended up working briefly with The Guardian, and just one thing led to another. So it was kind of a series of events. I met this Guardian journalist who was very good to me, and I realised I had, not only did I love writing, but I loved the element of speaking to people. That's what has always been the kind of the true love for me with journalism, is meeting people and speaking to people. Communication is kind of my bread and butter in the work. So as much as I like being at the desk, it's always more interesting to get out and meet people. So that's what I still love about it.
So then kind of next thing I'd love to ask about is, over the course of your journalism career, you've kind of developed a specialization in immigration. I'd love to hear what in particular kind of shaped that, and what does that look like for you in terms of, your journey to getting there?
There's a number of factors. I guess the primary one is that I grew up in a household where we spoke about immigration and refugees in a way that I would say very few households did in the 80s and 90s in Ireland, and that's because my granddad came here as a refugee in the 1940s, as a political refugee. And my dad, even though he never officially wrote about immigration, as I said, he was a journalist, he was very interested in immigrant groups coming to Ireland in the late 80s and early 90s, and he actually wrote this kind of mini booklet pamphlet about them at the time, where there were so few coming here. But so it was kind of in my psyche, I guess. And then when I moved back to Ireland in 2014 from London and started the Irish Times, I was kind of looking for an area that wasn't being covered that much, that I could kind of build a niche in. And even though people were reporting on immigration to a certain extent, there was no specialization or focus on it. So I kind of decided to really delve into it. And in 2015, I started writing a series, a feature series called New to the Parish, which I wrote for 7 years. I wrote until 3 years ago, which was different stories of people who come here, whether they were seeking asylum, for education, for relationship reasons. And that gave me a new insight into the kind of the humanity behind the immigrant experience. And then in the last 2 years, so more or less, I've been focusing a lot more on the reporting side of immigration because it's such a massive story. So less features, more news. But it is, I think it's one of the major stories on the planet today. It feeds into every element of society. I have just come from a conference that was held this morning to mark 3 years since the war in Ukraine began, and as we know, Ukrainian refugees has been a huge element of our discussion here around immigration. So it really is part of everyone's lives, whether or not they realise it or not.
That's very, very true. I would love to hear, well, it sounds like already there's a lot of activist discourse and standing up for social justice in your work as a journalist, so I would love to hear how activism, your values, shapes your journalism and what you report on.
I would say I'm very cautious to link activism to my work because it's not really journalistically correct to do that. I try to remain as objective and unbiased as possible in what I do. I think it's a bit problematic letting too much activism feed into your work, and I know some journalists do take the activist route, but it means that you can be somewhat blinkered on trying to understand the other side, even if you don't agree with what they're saying. So I'd be quite guarded on being, I guess, a spokesperson for any type of immigrant group, or even though it's probably clear where my priorities lie and and how I feel about the issue, I think it's important to maintain a certain level of objectivity, because when it comes to writing about the far right, writing about anti-immigrant rhetoric, I need to be able to speak to those people as well, and they're not going to speak to me if they see me as someone who is solely advocating for immigrant groups. So I try to maintain objectivity, but I do think that journalism around immigration obviously feeds into the narrative around activism, because any group that is supporting or promoting the rights of a vulnerable group of people needs their voice heard within the media, and I try to provide that to a certain extent as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes total sense. I would love to hear, kind of in a world that is getting more and more polarized, where free speech and censorship is being often kind of the forefront of conversation, how has journalism become, would you say journalism has become a more and more important field as kind of the world becomes more and more polarized?
Oh, it is for sure an extremely important field. The problem is a lot of people don't see that or don't agree with that. I think I don't have to tell anyone who's watching this that there are many people out there who claim people like myself who write for the so-called mainstream media are lying, which I've had people I know say this to me, and I find this it's not hurtful because it's not a personal attack, but it's deeply problematic, and it's frightening, because I know that the work that I do and the work that everyone who sits around me in the Irish Times do, and they did in the Guardian and they did in other places I've worked, that it is fact-based, it is well researched, it's thoroughly researched, and that is the news that people should have available to them. But more and more so, people do not consume that news. They do rely on social media, they do rely on people who claim to be experts in fields that they have no idea. One thing that really scares me is I'm not really on TikTok. I have an account for work reasons, but I see a lot of accounts now of people who take issues. So let's say it's stabbing in Stoneybatter a few weeks ago, whatever it may be, and they just, it's not even some reporting on it, but they inform people as to what happened. It could be a protest that's happened in relation to a pro or anti-immigrant situation. These people are literally just reading different social media posts and putting it together and presenting themselves as experts, and that frightens me. So I think, just going back to the original question, journalism holds a really important role in our society. I hear those New York Times ads all the time where they get a journalist on to talk about the work that they do and why funding their journalism is so important. But I agree. Journalism has to be funded because it needs money. We all need to survive and pay our bills. But it's also the fact that in a world where Elon Musk is spouting almost minute by minute lies, you just need to know where to turn for some form of clarity regarding the discussion, whatever that discussion is about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So Stan's audience is mostly comprised of third level students, recent graduates, a lot of young people, and something to kind of take note of is this growing onus, I think, for staying educated and staying informed. What advice would you give to students and recent graduates, young people right now, in terms of staying informed and talking about local to global issues?
I would advise to seek out individuals who you can read their coverage, their work, and then decide if you trust them, make them one of your go-to people. I often reference a colleague of mine called Sally Hayden. Now, she covers international issues. She's based in Beirut at the moment. She for years was our roving Africa correspondent. But she is one of the leading journalists in the world, I think, on migration issues, because she's been at the coalface of it. She did so much around the Mediterranean. And I know from reading her work how well researched, how thought out, involved she is in her work, and I think anyone who reads that can see that. So I would advise young journalists to find a number of individuals, make a list of 5, maybe 10 people who you can, and different topics, different issues, someone covering tech, someone covering business, someone covering culture, whatever it may be, and just say, this person's really good at their job. And the beauty of today is we live in a world where that person can be anywhere in the world. They don't have to be here in Ireland. So I think that's a real privilege that we have. But and then your algorithm, because we live in a world of algorithms, will revolve around that, and they will offer you more content from people related to that. But you do have to keep researching, you have to keep looking. I think I graduated from college 15 years ago 15 years ago, and the world, even I realise now, is so entirely different. I wasn't being bombarded with information the way people are now. Twitter it was the advent of Twitter. It was seen as this wonderful tool for communication. So I think I didn't have to leave in college really question where I was getting my information from. I took Twitter as a reliable source a lot of the time. So I think it's questioning, also really finding the journalist in you to just question everything that you see. And I think people are getting better than that with AI. I mean, I'm sure people have seen that horrendous video that's gone out from Trump of envisioning what Gaza would look like. And that is clearly AI. We know that now. We might not have seen that as AI even a year ago. So it's questioning, it's asking, is this true, is this not? And using your own values and your own education, I don't want to say education, but your own ability to ask more, to just, I guess, find out truth, whatever truth means in this day and age.